May 17, 2009, and I'm on Space Shuttle Atlantis, about to go out and do a spacewalk on the Hubble Space Telescope. And our task that day was to repair an instrument that had failed. And this instrument was used by scientists to detect the atmospheres of far-off planets. Planets in other solar systems could be analyzed using this spectrograph to see if we might find a planet that was Earth-like or a planet that could support life. And just when they got good at doing this, the power supply on this instrument failed. It blew. It wasn't working. So the instrument could no longer be used. And there was no way really to replace this unit or to repair the instrument, because when they launched this thing and they got it ready for space flight, they really buttoned it up. They didn't want anybody to screw with this thing, whether you were on the ground or whether you were in space. It was buttoned up with a access panel that blocked the power supply that had failed. And this access panel had 117 small screws with washers. And just to play it safe, they put glue on the screw threads so they would never come apart. You know, it could withstand a space launch, and there's no way we could get in to fix this thing. But we really wanted this capability back. So we started working, and for 5 years, we designed this spacewalk, and we designed over 100 new space tools to be used. Great taxpayer expense, millions of dollars, thousands of people worked on this. And my buddy, Mike Good, who we call Bueno, he and I were going to go out to do the spacewalk. I was going to be the guy actually doing the repair. And inside was my friend Drew Feustel, one of my best friends. He was inside. He's going to read me the checklist. And we had practiced for years and years for this. And they built us our own practice instrument and gave us our own set of tools so we could practice in our office, in our free time, during lunch, after work, on the weekends. We became like one mind. He would say it, I would do it. We had our own language. And now's the day to go out and do this task. The thing I was most worried about leaving the airlock that day was my path to get to the telescope, because it was along the side of the space shuttle. And if you kind of look over the edge of the shuttle, it's kind of like looking over a cliff at that point with 350 miles to go down to the planet. And there were no good handrails. When we're spacewalking, we like to grab onto things in our space gloves and be nice and steady. But I got to this one area along the side of the shuttle, and there were no good handrails to grab. I had to grab like a wire or a hose or a knob or a screw. And I'm kind of a big goon, and when there's no gravity, you know, you can get a lot of momentum built up, and I could go spinning off into space. And I knew I had a safety tether that would probably hold, but I also had a heart that I wasn't so sure about. So I knew they would get me back. I just wasn't sure what they would get back on the end of the tether when they reeled me in. So I was really concerned about this. And I took my time, and I got through the treacherous path and out to the telescope. And the first thing I had to do was to pull off or remove a handrail from the telescope that was blocking the access panel. And there were 2 screws on the top, and they came off easily. And there was 1 screw on the bottom right, and that came out easily. And the 4th screw is not moving. And my tool is moving, but the screw is not. And I look close, and I realize it's stripped. And I realize that that handrail's not coming off, which means I can't get to the access panel with these 117 screws that I've been worrying about for 5 years. Which means I can't get to the power supply that failed. Which means we're not going to be able to fix this instrument today. Which means all these smart scientists can't find life on other planets. And I'm to blame for this. And I could see what they would be saying in the science books of the future. This was going to be my legacy. I realized this. That my children and my grandchildren would read in their classrooms, we would know if there was life on other planets. But Gabby and Daniel's dad, my children would suffer from this. Gabby and Daniel's dad broke the Hubble Space Telescope, and we'll never know. For the next hour or so, we tried all kinds of things. I was going up and down the space shuttle, trying to figure out where I needed to go to get the next tool they wanted me to get to try to fix this problem, and nothing was working. And then they called up, after about an hour and 10 or 15 minutes of this, They said they wanted me to go to the front of the shuttle to a toolbox and get vice grips and tape. And I thought to myself, we are running out of ideas. I didn't even know we had tape on board. I'm going to be the first astronaut to use tape in space during a spacewalk. But I follow directions. So I get to the front of the space shuttle and I open up the toolbox and there's the tape. And at that point I was very close to the front of the orbiter, right by the cabin window. And I knew that my best pal was in there trying to help me out. And I could not stand to even think of looking at him because I felt so bad about the way this day was going, the way it turned out. Not like what we had thought about, but all the work he and I had put in. And I couldn't even stand to even think of looking up at him. But I realized that he's actually, through the corner of my eye, through my helmet, just aside there, I can kind of see that he's trying to get my attention. And I look up at him like this, and he's a little bit above me in the window, and he's just cracking up smiling and giving me the okay sign. And I'm like, is there another spacewalk going on out here? And I really can't talk to him because if I say anything, the ground will hear. Houston will hear, with the control center will hear. So I'm kind of like playing charades with him. I'm like, what are you, nuts? And I expect him, I didn't want to look because I thought what he was going to do instead of giving me the okay sign, I thought he was going to give me the finger. Because, I'm thinking he's going to go down in the history book with me. But he's saying, no, we're okay. You just hang in there a little bit longer. We're going to make it through this. We're in this together. You're doing great. Just hang in there. And if there was ever a time in my life that I needed a friend, it was at that moment. And there was my buddy, just like I saw in that movie, the camaraderie of those guys sticking together. And I didn't believe him at all. I figured we were out of luck. But I said, at least if I'm going down with my best pal. And as I turned to make my way back over the treacherous path one more time, Houston called up and told us what they had in mind. They wanted me to use that tape to take the bottom of the handrail and then see if I could yank it off the telescope. And they said it was going to take about 60 pounds of force for me to do that. And Drew answers the call and he goes, 60 pounds of force. And they call me Mass, it's short for my last name. He goes, Mass, I think you got that in you. What do you think? And I'm like, you bet, Drew, let's go get this thing. And I get back to the telescope and I put my hand on that handrail and the ground calls again and they go, well, Drew, you guys are okay to do this, but right now we don't have any downlink from Mike's helmet camera. I got these cameras mounted on my helmet so they can see everything I'm doing. It's kind of like your mom looking over your shoulder when you're doing your homework, And they go, we don't have any downlink for another 3 minutes, but we know we're running late on time here, so if you have to. And I'm saying, let's do it now while they can't watch. Because the reason I'm taping this thing is if any debris gets loose, they're going to get all worried and it's going to be another hour and we'll never fix this thing. We've been through enough already. So I'm like, let's do it now while Mom and Dad aren't home. Let's have the party. So I'm like, Drew, I think we should do it now. And Drew's like, go. And bam, that thing comes right off.
Disposal
And I
bag,
pull
please.
out my power tool, and now I've got that access panel with those 117 little bitty screws with their washers and glue, and I'm ready to get each one of them. And I pull the trigger on my power tool, and nothing happens. And I look, and I see that the battery is dead. And I turn my head to look at Bueno, who's in his spacesuit, again looking at me like, what else can happen today? And I said, Drew, the battery's dead in this thing. I'm going to go back to the airlock, and I'm going to swap out the battery, and I'm going to recharge my oxygen tank, because by all this moving around, was getting low on oxygen. I needed to get a refill. And he said, go. And I'm going back over that shuttle, and I noticed two things. One was that treacherous path that I was so scaredy-cat sissy pants about going over, it wasn't scary anymore. That in the course of those couple hours of fighting this problem, I had gone up and down that thing about 20 times. And my fear had gone away because there was no time to be a scaredy cat. It was time to get the job done. We got all those screws out, new power supply, buttoned it up. They tried it. They turned it on from the ground. It all was working. The power supply was working. The instrument had come back to life. And at the end of that spacewalk, after about 8 hours, I'm inside the airlock getting things ready for Bueno and I to come back inside. And my commander says, hey, Mass, you've got about 15 minutes before Bueno's going to be ready to come in. Why don't you go outside of the airlock and enjoy the view? So I go outside, and I take my tether, and I clip it on a handrail, and I let go, and I just look. And the Earth, from our altitude at Hubble, we're 350 miles up, we can see the curvature. We can see the roundness of our home planet. And it's the most magnificent thing I've ever seen. It's like looking into heaven.